Hello, everybody.
Turn this up in my headphones, Charles.
Turning it up. Hello, everybody, one and all. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. We just got off of a recording with BookTuber extraordinaire Sandra Gibbons.
Yes, we did. It was a total blast having a chat with Sandra. We're so grateful that she came on, and I really enjoyed this discussion of Book 4 of The Wheel of Time,
That's right.
Shadow Rising. It's, yeah, and so cool to have Sandra Gibbons on. She's, as Charles said, a booktuber, which means that you can find her making videos on YouTube under the name Sandra Gibbons. So highly recommend checking her out. She's making great videos on fantasy content, and give her a subscribe over there. But
that's right. She's also on Twitter as well, at Sandra Gibbons. We get into a lot of conversation on the FTF account over there with Sandra, so definitely follow her there as well. Before we get into the interview, let's do a quick spoiler warning, right, Dylan?
Yes. So we will, in this episode, be having a no holds barred conversation about the Shadow Rise. Yeah, I've never dropped that one before. I gotta keep it fresh here.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
So we will not hold back from having spoilers in this conversation. We'll be getting into depth in book 4 of The Wheel of Time. So if you haven't gotten up to book 4 yet, The Shadow Rising by Robert Jordan, then now is a good time to turn this down in your headphones if you don't want to have anything spoiled. We will not go, I haven't even read past The Shadow Rising yet. I'm a first-time reader of The Wheel of Time, so we will not spoil anything beyond book 4. All right.
All right. Well, thank you for that spoiler warning, Dylan. And without further delay, let's get into our book discussion of Book 4 of The Wheel of Time, The Shadow Rising by Robert Jordan, featuring BookTuber extraordinaire Sandra Gibbons. Okay, we're recording for Wheel of Time 4 with Sandra, so we'll just have a quick moment of silence and then we'll get right into it. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friends, Charles.
Yes, we are talking with friends, the plural today, because with us, we have BookTuber extraordinaire Sandra Gibbons.
Hey. I'm happy to be here. Thank you, guys.
The honors all ours, Sandra. Thank you so much for being here. We're excited to talk Wheel of Time 4, The Shadow Rising by Robert Jordan. But before we get into it, Sandra, would you like to just take a quick moment to introduce yourself, tell everyone more about you?
Yeah, Sandra Gibbons again. I'm basically just a fantasy fangirl. Any kind of franchise. It could be video games like Witcher, Final Fantasy. I can geek out about all of it. I think I've had a couple conversations with you, Dylan, about it. But yeah, epic fantasy, romantic fantasy, YA fantasy. Like I can dig all of it and gush about all of it.
Oh, you said Final Fantasy.
Yes.
Dylan's excited.
Yep.
Yeah. Sandra and I have had a few exchanges about Final Fantasy over on Twitter, and definitely give Sandra a follow if you haven't already, because she's super fun to interact with on there, and I always have an awesome time when we chat on there. So
yeah. And subscribe
what
on
is your
YouTube
handle over there, Sandra?
What?
Your handle over on Twitter.
My handle is just Sandra Gibbons.
Nice.
All right. And like the title suggests, we're talking about the 4th book of Wheel of Time today, The Shadow Rising. And Sandra, if I'm correct, this is your second time reading this book. Is that right?
Second time. Yep.
Got
I
it.
listened to audio and read it each time.
Fantastic. It's my second time as well, and it's Dylan's first time. So this is very exciting. We got a lot of different perspectives in the mix here. So let's go ahead and get right into it. The first thing that I think we should talk about is this idea of how The Shadow Rising stands out compared to books 1 through 3. And I know, Dylan, when we ended book 3, you were like, I'm excited to keep going with Wheel of Time. You know, it ended in this exciting way, and I'm ready to jump into book 4. And book 4 is just so different from books 1 through 3. And I was wondering, Dylan, as a first-time perspective, how was your experience going through it?
I would describe The Shadow Rising as the book I'm most ambivalent about so far in this series, in terms of having the strongest emotions in either direction, like both directions. I'd say at times I was intensely frustrated for sure, and I was Sandra, you know from a few of our exchanges, some things that frustrated me about some things, like Rand's character at the beginning of
not
it.
To laugh all that much.
Yeah. Aiel. Yeah, some stuff definitely was, I'd go so far as to say, distressing for me. And then I would say on the other side of things, this had some of my favorite moments, had some of the best character building, especially for Elaine, I would say, which we'll get into that with more detail, and gave the chance for some character parent to, I think, like characters to shine in ways that I didn't see them shining as much in earlier books. And that had me really excited and happy in some of these epic moments. So I kind of, I guess as a piece of art, The Shadow Rising made me feel a lot of things, and that's a compliment. And I am super pumped to get into talking about, because I feel like this one has the most talking points. I'm at least like interested in getting more folks' opinions on, because it elicits such a strong emotional reaction for me.
That's well said. And Sandra, you had released a video back in December about your initial reactions to reading Wheel of Time 4 for the first time, and I highly recommend everyone listening to go back and watch that. And one of the things that you had mentioned is, because of this book's length and how much is going on and how much you had to kind of, experience, and then you were kind of looking forward to your second read through. So now that we're here, I would love to know what your thoughts and your experience were like reading The Shadow Rising for the second time.
Yeah, no, I definitely got more out of it and enjoyed it more than the first time I read it. It was just so overwhelming for me as a first-time reader. And I know that this book was the first book in the series that kind of broke from that structure of the first 3, where, you get some time with the characters, and then it's about chapter 5 or 6 or so where there's that inciting incident, and then everyone kind of branches off onto their little quest, and then there's a big showdown at the end. Like, this one diverted from that in every possible way. So this one, while action kicked off like super early, chapter 2, and then chapter 10 again, it just, like, I think I talked about this before, but if the scale is 1 to 10, it stayed at a 10 the whole time. There was just such huge important things happening. So I still finish it even on my second read through, kind of with this like a numbness. I don't really know how to put it, just kind of sitting with
you sound drained
everything that just
it,
happened.
Like exhausted from
There's
just being
so much. But like you said, Dylan, there were definitely scenes that are going to be like some of my favorite moments that have happened so far in the series, but it's just as a 1,000-page book.
Yeah.
I feel exactly the same way, Sandra. This was my second time going through it as well, and it's just a different experience than going through the first 3 books. It's like 100,000 words longer than the other ones, and it just, like you said, it breaks the structure that we were used to. And for me, this is the first book that really gives you what I consider the quintessential Wheel of Time reading experience, where it's just puts you through a lot. And when I first read it, I had this mindset of like, am I not am I not going to remember details? Am I not retaining enough to appreciate the story? I had all these concerns my first time around, and when I started the series again, I'm like, did I retain enough from my read all those years ago to be able to remember what's going on? And when I think that it doesn't really matter. Robert Jordan puts you in the experience, and you get different stuff out of it different times, and there's not so much pressure to retain everything. And when you approach it from that angle, and that's why I think Sandra and I had a bit of a leg up on Dylan, because we've read this book already, where it's like you can kind of just take to take a little bit of a step back and appreciate what's going on. And I enjoyed it more my second time through as well. It's so much longer, and you do feel like you have to get through it at certain times, but when the pressure's kind of off a little bit in terms of like making sure you had to retain everything and remember something for a twist in book 11, it's like you get used to it.
Yeah. You two definitely had a leg up on me in that sense, I'd say. There were times for sure where I was like, how am I going to follow all these different Aes Sedai and what's going on? I'm like,
and the Aiel. Yeah.
And the Aiel. Yeah. So we get and that's a great point, Sandra, because when the Aiel start coming up, it is like, wait, how many wise ones are there? And is it important that I distinguish between them? And right now, based on what we got in The Shadow Rising, it doesn't feel like that ended up being particularly important for my comprehension or enjoyment of the book. But you don't know when you're reading it, like, if I don't differentiate between these two wise ones, am I in trouble here? And that makes it tough to follow all these different characters. We did get some great advice when we went to Twitter of Time before we started this, that a lot of folks were kind of like, hey, yeah, if you want to be a person who's constantly taking notes and getting everything down and trying to make all these intense predictions and all that kind of stuff, that's one way to approach a series. But you can also enjoy it as kind of this more like, sit back and let it happen. It's a journey, and maybe you'll miss some things, but that's okay. And that was kind of a point I reached during this. And that wasn't the main frustration stuff for me, was more with some character stuff that we'll get into. But once you accept it and kind of enjoy the ride, it's a little bit better. Is that what you found too, Sandra, on your second read?
100%. And I would agree that the character development is probably the weakest part of RJ's stuff for me too.
So let's get into it, because all three of us have said, oh, this book has like some of our favorite moments and some of our most shocking moments. So I'd like to hear from each of you like a moment that stuck out that we can all kind of react to. And I guess I'll start, Dylan, I'll start with you. If you want to share like a favorite moment or a shocking moment, which one is it and what is it? And let's all kind of jump in on it.
Maybe it's both, which is
okay.
So most of my favorite things that happen in this book come from Elaine, who really gets the opportunity to get a lot more point of views and all this kind of stuff that she was in the background, especially in books 1 and 2. Book 3, The Dragon Reborn, you and I, Charles, gave her the Most Improved award, where we're like, oh, she's starting to develop her voice as a character. We see what she's doing. It did seem kind of in response to the fact that she was placed in book 3 between Nynaeve and Egwene and kind of had to become this mediator, but it makes sense given her background as this, like, she's the daughter heir, she grew up in politics, all this kind of stuff. And I think that now that RJ has figured out who Elaine is, he was like, oh, now I can write POVs, and we get this character that's very different from, I think, all the other characters, and especially when we get into some of the stuff that maybe we weren't as happy with, like it feels sometimes like RJ has these default characteristics that he will often apply to female characters in the series, as kind of being like stubborn and hard-headed and like, I don't know, like mean a lot of times, especially to the men, and this kind of way of being that I think Elaine comes to, like, she comes to be a juxtaposition against that, to show kind of like, okay, RJ is showing us he doesn't think all women are like that. Kind of like the Fail is the, like, for me, like the worst version, the worst offender of this, and and then like the best version of that kind of character is for me Egwene, the like stubborn, hard-headed. Makes more sense why she's that way. But anyway, asked for best moment. I'm going to give you best moment, which is when Elaine like talks out her feelings in a reasonable way with Egwene of like, hey, I really like you and I feel like you like Rand, but I also like Rand. Like, what can I do about that? And they like work it out as like civilized people, because especially Elaine has a lot of tact and ability to communicate mostly well. I know there are times when she doesn't. And then following that up when she's with Rand and she's kind of in this place where she has these reactions to being wrapped up in all this Talviran stuff, where she's like has these ridiculously strong feelings for Rand and knows it's like, this is ridiculous that I feel this way. I hardly know this guy, but I feel this way. So like, why not just tell him that and see what happens? And he seems nice enough. So she does. And she literally is just like, hey, Rand, I want to kiss you. Like, can we kiss each other here? And it's like, for a book which is like one of the things RJ did when he set out to write this book, we've talked about this before from that like interview you heard, Charles, is like to write about like how communication gets messed up and it's difficult to translate things, especially between big distances, but also just like interpersonally. And Elaine is kind of the counter to that. And she's just like, hey, I want to kiss you. Can we kiss each other? And just to see with all these relationships that are not straightforward and people like miscommunicating and parents saying like being mean to Fail to try to get her to like not go with him on a dangerous place instead of being vulnerable and normal and communicative. Elaine is just this counterpoint of like, hey, I feel this way. Let me tell the person I feel this way. And like, do you want to kiss me? And that moment I was like, thank you, Elaine. Like, that is a reasonable thing to do when you feel this way. So props to Elaine.
She wrote him a letter. Yeah.
Two of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I do like that about her. There were just several times throughout the series where it almost felt like to me that Nynaeve and Egwene, and even in this book, Fael a little bit, were just different shades of the same character. Yes. And Elaine just always stuck out as kind of her own. And yeah, that's all I wanted to add there.
Right. I agree. This is I'm going to say something here, and you guys, I'm curious what you think. I feel that Robert Jordan almost world builds his characters into existence.
Yes.
I feel like he's so busy creating this universe, and because it's so vast and rich that when you do insert a character into a scene, it almost like the characterization almost writes itself. And book 4 is the beginning of this, where the doors to the plot just blow wide open, and it's just this like vast world. And Elaine is one of those characters that benefits the most from this creating characters into existence through world building, because she has to be, with Rand, and then she has to be with Nynaeve and Elaine, and they can't all be like the same person any longer, because now we need to get pulled into different scenes. And the fact that Elaine comes from royalty and has a different background from the others, she just sticks out and starts to do interesting things and say interesting things and be more in her emotions, which I know Dylan appreciates, than Nynaeve, who is emotionally stunted from having to present herself as an authority, like overcompensate for her age and experience, even though she had a leadership position. So yeah, Elaine has a strong showing in this book. She doesn't stick out to me so much because we don't get like that much of her, but I do think she continues to get that most improved award. I'll give you that, Dylan.
I want to give her MVP this time around, but I also want to, we'll get there, but I also want to hear from Sandra if she has any favorite moments that that stick out, and we can get back to more character stuff too, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's definitely an Elaine moment that it's one of my favorites, but we can probably save that one for the character segment later. It's not a serious one whatsoever. It's more of a fun
go for
one.
it. I want to hear it.
No, it's a cup of wine, that chapter.
Oh,
Drunk
yes.
Elaine.
No, I love
Drunk
that.
Elaine
I love that.
is the best Elaine. It's just, I don't know. It was such a tender moment between her and Tom. And I've been wanting that scene forever, I feel like. And it finally happened. And I loved like the mustache tug, all of it.
Oh, yeah. Elaine's just being a person. Like, she's like a teenager interacting with the world in a way that feels so real.
She might be daughter heir, but she is not, above having a few glasses of wine and having a little talk with Tom.
Yeah, when you have a book that's like 400,000 words long, it's like, can you give us some moments for characterization?
Yes.
Like, can we just get a moment where they're like not questing and just drunk in a tavern and and seeing how Elaine exists with her relationships between Tom and Nynaeve and just having these moments where it's not dedicated toward expanding the world building or advancing the plot, but actually giving us a sense of what these characters might be like just day to day.
Yeah, definitely. It almost kind of reminded me of Game of Thrones, when the later season, when they're all just kind of drinking ale and bonding. I just love those moments a lot. They do a lot for it.
Yeah.
The story.
That was one of the last great moments of Game of
Thrones.
I actually felt like but we won't delve too much into that.
All right. Well, let's get into some characterization here. One of the things that really interests me about the beginning of this book is all these strained relationships in the Wheel of Time. One of the things that I've always appreciated is that, yes, Matt, Perrin, Rand, they all are friends, but their circumstances have now changed so drastically. This book starts right after Rand wields Kalendor, and all these people are like, we are not worthy to him, So it's like, it changed their relationship, and I really liked all these moments where Matt is like, geez, Rand's really like gone off the deep end. Like, I hope he doesn't channel around me. Like, they're not really like friendly anymore, and then they go back to questing and they fall into some of those friendly moments again. But I do like how there is a lot of pressure and strain being put on the three of them, and to me, one of my favorite things about these characters is how they all started together and through circumstance are still friendly, but they're being pulled apart now, and you can see that starting to happen, and they still have these friendships, but as we go into from book 4 to 5 to 6, it's like to see where these characters go. This book, Robert Jordan's not afraid to be like, hey, we can put them on opposite ends of the map now and see how this works out. And I just really appreciated those relationships, like how that kind of tension started in the Stone of Tyr.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting, especially there's that one moment where Perrin is like, I'm going to go back to Two Rivers because things are getting real messed up there. And then we have Matt as kind of like, you can tell he sort of wants to, but he's also like, I think I'm past the Two Rivers at this point. Yeah. And he's like, okay, well, that's cool, dude. Like, I support you. Go back there, but I'm going to do my own thing. And these are the moments I like, is when like they both kind of respect that and leave on decent terms instead of like trying to manipulate each other into hating each other, which happens from time to time. In Wheel of Time.
Yeah, as grating as some of Matt's tendencies can be, he's definitely still one of my favorite characters to watch just for amusement, entertainment's sake. But yeah, this book to me, it felt more like Perrin's, I guess, his huge arc, because by the end of it, he is like nothing like the blacksmith that we met from book 1,
Right. No matter what he tries to tell us, we're not believing.
Yeah.
Right. And that we can get into that because Perrin is one of my favorite characters, and not because he does anything spectacular, but he fits these roles so well, and he's written into them so well. And even in this beginning, Rand is like, oh, Perrin's going off and doing what he must. Like, I understand the Two Rivers is under attack, but I'm like too important now to go over there, and I have confidence in Perrin and delegating that responsibility to Perrin to do that. And this is where I think Wheel of Time stands out against most fantasy series, because now we have what could be a whole book in itself of Perrin. Like, Perrin's like the majority of this book. He's almost a third of the whole thing of him. Basically, the plot is him going to the Two Rivers and increasing the defenses and warding off the Trolloc army, and then also turning away the White Cloaks. But I enjoyed it because the stakes were lower. It was a more contained story in this huge book, but there's a lot of moments I really liked about it. We get that whole, I kind of compared him to Jon Snow a few times where it's like, I don't want it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Perrin I feel like Perrin kind of invented these tropes in a few ways. He's like, oh, I'm not Rand, I'm not Matt, I am just someone who's just trying to do the right thing. I can't, they're not interested in going back to Two Rivers, and I don't want to just leave them hanging, so I'm gonna go. His decisions are guided by his nobility, like his nature, and he's just kind of falls into this leadership position, and everyone buys him as this leader before he does. And it's that trope that Perrin, in this series full of like fantasy tropes where you can kind of roll your eyes a little bit, I think Perrin just almost falls into this trope really comfortably. I just really like the Perrin.
Oh, I love that trope. Yeah. Perrin, I'm with you. Like, Perrin is one of my favorite. I will say my opinion tarnished just a little bit because of another character, but yeah.
Which character is that? Let's get into it.
Oh.
I think I know. And I feel the same.
Rhymes with Aiel.
Yeah. Yeah, is that Fail then? I legit, when I read the book, I cannot stop myself from saying fail. And I don't think that's a huge problem with some of how I feel about this character, because Fail is, I don't know. What I feel like is Fail took a step back as a character during this book. And I sent you a message about this, Sandra, that you'll probably remember when you were helping validate some of my early frustrations with this book, which is like Fael started last book, or at least I came into the last book, The Dragon Reborn, as this kind of like, I'm an adventurer, I want to find the horn. I'm not like every other character, every other female character that Robert Jordan has written. I'm doing my own thing, I have my own adventure. And she kind of just got wrapped up in like, these people are doing interesting things, they might give me a chance to find this horn. And then she started to fall for Perrin, which, like, Perrin seems like a nice dude, why not? And then something happened in between.
It was very drastic.
Yeah, it's like, what happened in between book 3 and book 4 where Fael came back as what feels like a totally different character, where it's like, now she's doing all of these like classic RJ isms, which is just like being stubborn, berating people, putting her hands on her hips all the time, crossing her arms beneath her breasts, which is like, I think that's just called crossing your arms. Like, how do you cross your arms above your breasts? I don't know. I think that would just be putting your hands on your shoulders. You could cut out some words too by doing that. But anyway,
those are good chuckles. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was kind of the braid pulling of this book was like, for Fael, because the braid pulling got toned down, I felt like, from Nynaeve.
Yeah, Nynaeve was distinctively trying not to pull her braid in this book.
Right. So, and she also does the calling the love interest by their full name is another classic.
Oh, and they're frustrated.
RJ, yeah, like Perrin Ibarra.
You get here right now.
Yeah, it's like, oh my god. Which, like, I guess I don't mind some characters having those characteristics. In fact, I've said to this point, Egwene has been my favorite character. Elaine's kind of up there now too. But Egwene, you understand why she's the way she is, and Fael, it's like she just kind of ends up fitting whatever Robert Jordan wants her to in that moment, it feels like, and the actions she takes are not really understandable given anything we know about her, and they're different than she's behaved, like drastically different than she's behaved in previous moments, without us seeing any reason why she would be different now. And I think it just, like, her moments very rare, they don't really feel earned, and it kind of, I come away from it being like, what is the message of Fael's role in all of this? It almost feels to me like RJ's message is, like, from Perrin's point of view, like, women are so incomprehensible and mysterious, and the things they do don't make sense, which is not a good message. It's not a message that I would want sent. And I understand, another good Twitter of Time advice for us was like, it's okay to get frustrated by those kind of moments in a modern perspective, but keep in mind, like, this book was what, 92? Like, that's the year I was born.
Yeah.
It's like like, so I'm gonna try to give some, like, a lot of media was like that at that time, and I think it's like, I feel valid in being frustrated by it, and I understand if other people
No, I mean, I was frustrated by the same thing. I feel like in the previous book, she was introduced as more of kind of like that spirited Min type of character. And then this book, I felt like her arc was almost clinging to this desperate need to be close to Perrin, with like her jealousy and her, it was almost like a lack of confidence in herself. I don't know how to like really word it, but I don't know. By the end of the book, I felt like Fael was basically this character to strengthen Perrin, to just empower him and help him kind of fill out his shoes and what he became by the end. And that was basically it.
Yeah, I agree, Sandra. I mean, she had such interesting reasons to be in this whole environment. She was hunting for the horn and everything. And then I guess Perrin's Tavira nature just pulled her in. What can I say?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was kind of like eye-rolly to be like, women are like this and men are like this throughout their whole story arc, where it's like, oh, you have to like guide them along, have a sweet pie and an apple tart, and we'll make the decisions for you. Like, now, just make him something nice, draw him a hot bath, he'll relax, and then you can do whatever you want to him. You know, it's like, what? This is bizarre. Isn't Fael like a warrior and a part of nobility? Like, and there are parts that I liked. Like, I like this idea of having two stubborn people trying to get each other to be emotionally vulnerable, but it just falls apart when they fall into these tropes of like, Perrin, Barra, you get over here this instant. I don't want you to lead the army. It's too dangerous. And he's like, you need to go, Fael. It's too dangerous for you to be here. And it's like, we're all like, what's going on? Like, what is going on? This is not like, yeah, they're teenagers, but I feel like this is also stemming from Robert Jordan's inability to write like all these like relationships that when he doesn't have the characters fully realized. You know, I think he wanted someone for Perrin to marry and fall in love with that was strong and capable and noble, but that's kind of where his slot for Fael ended, and then the world building carried her away. But it and unlike Elaine's case, the world building just put her more and more into a slot, and we didn't really learn much about her. We do know that she is part of this nobility, and I did like that this ended with a wedding and them riding off and being cheered and everything. Like, I did like that, but yeah, I don't know. There was so much potential in that relationship that just, if you're gonna have two strong characters, why slot them so stereotypically into this weird women are like this, men are like this dynamic? It fell flat.
Yeah, I mean, you've read the rest of the series, so I have no idea what the relationship dynamic is going to be like later.
Right.
But I feel like part of the thing that sucks with reading the books, you know, so much later after they came out is, okay, this is book 4. There are how many books? 14 books.
Right.
And it's just, they got married in this book. So what is the relationship going to become? Like, I have no idea where this goes from there. But
Right. Yeah. It's interesting to see. It almost feels like Perrin's story is done now. Like it's done. It's like, where is he going to go from here? You know,
I hope that's not the case. Yeah, because he is one of my favorites. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a strong showing. I do admire Perrin in a lot of ways. In a book that's like got tons of these old school fantasy tropes and also tons of this like intense world building. He is the like humble, modest, and he lives up to it. And I admire him for all of those reasons. So big fan of Perrin. And yeah, hopefully he learns to pick up the hammer instead of the axe soon. It's like, who cares what he's holding? Seriously. Like even like all the women's circles, like, when are you going to pick up the hammer? It's like, what? Everyone has an opinion on Perrin's weapon choice. Very bizarre, but I liked him learning how to delegate and everything like that, and I appreciate the different levels of stakes that the series is getting into, and I liked having the lower stakes of being in the Two Rivers. So strong showing. So Sandra, we need to have a conversation about two characters in particular. But the first that I think we need to get into, I got in some hot water for this when we did a Wheel of Time tier list.
That's how you're doing it right then. That's how you know you're doing it right.
And we had put Lan as a B tier character. And
I am so bitter about
you were
this.
leading the charge, and you were not alone that he should have gone higher. And you have yet to change my mind, but I'm open to it. And now that you're here, Sandra, and I appreciate all your work, and I'm like super excited to talk about this with you. Let's get through some of these Lan moments and what stuck out for you, and why Lan as a character is worthy of more than just the B tier.
I'll see if I can channel my inner Lane and try to mediate Charles's pure hatred for Lan.
Oh, it's not that strong.
with Sandra's adoration. Yeah, what is it that you love so much about Lan?
It's probably this whole trope of like the fallen king or the king of like nothing. You know what I mean? Just that old bloodline that for whatever reason fell to ruin, and so he's kind of like the last descendant of that. So I've always gravitated towards that kind of character. But like apart from that, Lan is just, he's older, right? So he is more mature. He doesn't have some of the irritations that I get from other younger characters or our main cast of people, but he's such a stoic. But I feel like when he does say something, it's either going to be really funny or it's going to be the most poetic line of just the most romantic thing that you have ever heard in your life. So like when you're reading some of this and he'll talk to Nynaeve, it's like, whoa. I was not expecting him to just like come out and say that. And it's just moments like that just completely jar me. So it's like, he's a badass with a sword, and he only speaks when he has something that he feels very compelled to say. And then there's just still moments of humor that I never really expect. Just like in the very beginning when Rand is just sitting on the edge of the bed covered in blood, and like the first thing Lan says to him is like, "Oh, cut yourself shaving." It's like,
yeah, I remember
what?
that.
Yeah, it's just kind of a combination of all of that. I know that he hasn't gotten a lot of screen or page time, as compared to the rest of the characters, but I like Lan. Why don't you like him?
Well, it's not that I don't like him. It's just I'm indifferent about him. His personality is the sword guy as far as I'm concerned. He's like, you have to know when to sheathe the sword. It's like, what? You have to know when to kill yourself? Is that your advice that we're going to get into? It's like, that was the great hunt, right? It's like, know when to sheathe the sword. And of course, he's talking about just like stabbing yourself. It's like, okay, that's an interesting lesson to be teaching these kids. But there is something to be said. I will give you some points that like I did appreciate this thing you said about his maturity level, because especially in those first 3 books, it was kind of exhausting to have all of these characters just going on, and then it's like, oh, Lan actually has this kind of mysterious history about him. He does have a commanding presence about him, and he sticks out in that way, and I always appreciated that. But It's just like having a sword does not a personality make. I'm sorry.
Savage. So, okay, I had to talk Charles up when he was trying to put Lan in the C tier during that Wheel of Time character list, by the way. I went on this long, as I do, like maundering thing about why Lan is at least B tier. And like at the beginning of it, I said like, and by the way, like B is in the middle because we're doing like S, A, B, C, D, because, the culture of tier lists is we're not willing to accept that like it's just A through F, so we try to pretend the bottom one's D tier instead. And at the end of the whole thing, Charles was like, the most compelling thing you said there was that B is the middle tier.
Like, because there's nothing that he does that's like, bad. Like, I don't want to put him in a tier that like detracts, but I don't want to give him too much either.
Can I actually, Sandra, what you said has me kind of looking back on Lan with a different lens that at least appeals to me and what I look for in characters, which is this idea of a character in this book who's like this more, as you said, mature, like male character who's actually capable of, even though he is this badass with a sword and known for being a warrior and all these things, is actually willing to like say how he's feeling to the people around him. Like he says how he's, and not just romantically, like he says how he's feeling to Moraine. He says how he's feeling, of course, to Nynaeve, and he's actually making genuine efforts to be a good mentor to Rand. I understand your reservations, Charles, about that mentorship, but I don't know. I think there's something I'm gonna at least like, so it's spinning in my head now in a way in which I wasn't thinking about Lan that way, and we'll see where he ends up in the next tier list. I might make a case for it.
I mean, he says what he means, and he's not, apologetic about it. He's not worried about hurting anyone's feelings, and that's just, he doesn't dance around it, and I appreciate that, as compared to other characters just kind of flip-flopping all the time, and all of the internal dialogue back and forth.
That's well said. I do like him as a mentor figure in many ways, and it's like you said, Sandra. Like when he speaks, we should all be listening because he has this economy of words that very few other characters have, and he does get some really good dialogue, and like I'm on board with that. But the other thing is his relationship with Nynaeve, which I like in theory, but it just like comes out of nowhere. She's not Tavir, and she can't just pull him in like Rand and Perrin can. So it's like, what's happening here? I feel like there's all of a sudden one chapter in those first books where it's like, don't go, Nynaeve, I love you. It's like, whoa, didn't you guys like just meet? And Nynaeve's a hard person to, like, she doesn't give the best first impressions either. So I do like that Lan would see through that, and Nynaeve would admire his natural ability. But beyond that, it's like, I wish we had a character moment between the two of them. Like we saw Elaine getting drunk with Nynaeve and Tom. It's like, let's see Lan have a character moment. I would love that.
No, this is chalk it up to more off-page development from RJ.
Yeah.
I mean, there's only so many pages in Wheel of Time, guys. We can't develop everybody.
We gotta cut something.
That's really interesting to think about too, with that relationship and how it contrasts with the other ones that have the Taviran bump kind of going for it, where you give them that credit. I guess it's like, I think RJ has a lot of strengths in character building and relationship building in some ways too, in my perception. However, I don't think one of those strengths is doing the slow burn, drawn out little moments of how characters fall for each other. And it works for me with Elaine because she, and Rand, those two in particular, because she's sitting there like interacting with that world building of like, I feel so strongly, but she herself is aware of like this is silly. Like, this is silly that I feel so strongly about someone I don't know, but we buy that you would feel that strongly because of the way that RJ has woven, if you will, the Taviran stuff, where it's like something about Rand is just going to draw you toward him, and there's nothing you can do about that, Elaine. It sucks, but there you are. And she is like, as a character, she's in that situation and she's capable of saying like, okay, well, here I am, like, I guess I want to kiss this dude, so I guess I'll go try to make that happen. There's like,
Get it, girl.
but yeah, exactly. But Nynaeve and Lan is like, you don't have that excuse, like you were saying, Charles. So the lack of the slow burn feels much more abrupt. You're not willing to give that kind of credence, or at least I feel like it's more abrupt. I don't want to speak for other people. Love that relationship. That's like, there's a relationship. Yeah.
I mean, in hindsight, the relationship does make sense because, you know, Nynaeve has always been, you know, as the wisdom, she's always been very protective of the Two Rivers crew. And so she's also one of the strongest female personalities too. And it would take someone like Lan to be able to, you know, penetrate all of that and understand her.
I agree. RJ, I think, goes part to his world building. I think he matched these two characters in his plotting, and it makes a lot of sense that they're together. I just wish we were more surprised by it than like in book one, they're professing love for each other already. But that being said, they do fit well together. I think you need a really wise, patient person to get through that exterior of Nynaeve. And Nynaeve is one of my favorite characters. And even though she gets a little shortchanged in this book, she delivers. And one of my favorite moments is like the rising action of this book, where she takes on a Forsaken, like direct, like one-on-one, just they're both throwing their full power at each other. And I enjoyed it. It was so much fun. We didn't get so much action in this book, and then to have Nynaeve like getting angrier and angrier and realizing that she's matching a Forsaken and fighting a Forsaken, and then she figures out to just like, oh, I'll just throw this object at her face. Like, it's so good. I really liked it. I wonder what you thought about it, Sandra.
No, that scene with Mogadine. I don't know how you say it. I think there was a part where she did realize that she was actually more powerful than Mogadine, right?
Yeah.
But correct me if I'm wrong, she was trying to cut Mogadine off from the Dark One. But yeah, that was a badass scene for Nynaeve. There weren't a lot of like action adrenaline scenes like that, but that one stood out to me too. And then I think Elaine also had a huge moment too in the palace.
Yeah, she got not as cool as Nynaeve.
It wasn't
for
cool,
sure, but she did.
Yeah,
she laid the smack down on someone,
and
I think that Nynaeve moment, that was amazing. There might be some meowing going on in the background, so excuse that. But, that Nynaeve moment was amazing. I think it was so cool how. And it felt really well built toward, because of the way in which she has been this whole time. We've been told how powerful Nynaeve is, and finally we get to see her put that to use, and we buy she's able to take on a Forsaken.
Yeah, that was amazing. And I did like her throwing, was it the collar that she threw at their forehead?
I believe so. Yeah. It was some sort of
still
object.
managed. She still managed to hold on to the bracelets and the collar and the seal. And
right, she was able to shield Mogadine, and she's like, now I like this moment where she's like got Mogadine shielded. She's like, oh man, what do I do with this? Like, I just captured this very dangerous person. Yeah, and she's trying to determine like what to do, and she escapes. But it's these good matchups that RJ has in his brain of like, oh, these two people could go head to head and it would be very close and exciting. Yeah. And like the fact that he was able to plot that, and Nynaeve is someone we've been built up to expect. It's like, oh, she's incredibly powerful, but what's interesting is her limitation, and that she has to be incredibly angry in order to pull it off. She never knows if she can draw on her full potential or not. So that kind of helped create some stakes. And then also she's very practical, which kind of separates herself from other channelers, is that she's she likes herbs. She likes to take charge. She's not afraid to get physical, in her communicating and her, just taking the way she takes charge. Yeah, and her own braids.
Physical with that.
So, like, she realized, she's like, this person's been relying on channeling for thousands of years, so we'll see what I can do when I throw something at her face. It's like, that's actually good logic. I'm all for that.
Very creative, yeah.
For sure. So she earned some points for me. And although we didn't get a lot of female characters here, except for Vail, maybe, one of the most shocking moments for me actually happened super, super fast in the White Tower. And that's like the coup that goes on. It's almost like so shocking. Yeah. It's like
it was so brief. Yeah.
But I love the concept of it because it's true. Swan Sanche was playing a dangerous game, and you have all these Red Aja who are very, if they found out what she was doing, they would be very against it as risky to try and support a male channeler and actually help him become the Dragon Reborn. But it was delivered in such a way, it happened so fast in this book that's like 400,000 words. It's like, whoa, we're just only going to give we got like 30% of this book is Perrin realizing that people like him, and then we get this one short chapter of poor Swan getting deposed.
Yeah, that was probably one of my top scenes in this book too. I like Swan as a character. She's always strong and puts on that front of being very just kind of emotionally flat. She doesn't let her emotions get in the way of like whoever she's interacting with, but behind closed doors, especially with Moraine, she's that vulnerable side comes out. But that scene, it stood out as one of my favorite scenes that happened, not because of what happened to her obviously, but just how she came out of that. Whereas in the earlier book, when Logain was gentled, he's basically on suicide watch because of having his power taken away from him. Whereas Swan, she just kind of has the opposite. She's like more determined than ever to right everything that's happened. And I appreciated that about her character.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, Sandra, that resilience that we see from a character, it's again one of those moments where it feels very earned that a character like Swan would be resilient in the face of this. And I think her character has been built in a lot more subtle ways than some other characters. I think we've been shown more than told who Swan is. Besides like the telling moments, like the moments of being told are like when we keep getting told that she's like manipulating everyone like chess pieces, but she's also just kind of like sending children to take care of tasks. That part's not as great, but she comes off just in the way she communicates with people as, like you were saying, Sandra, like this, she's aware of what's going on for her. She has this vulnerable side to her, but she knows she's mature, and she knows that like, I am a ridiculously powerful person and I have to be able to appear that way, or something like this is always on the verge of happening, even if I do a pretty good job, just because of the circumstances. And I think her resilience in the face of this really tragic moment for her is amazing, and like a great moment that she faces it so strongly.
Yeah, I mean, I was just so blindsided. I mean, RJ was never secretive about Elida, scheming against her, but I just did not expect it to go down like this.
Yeah, it was shocking. And I don't know, I just always admired Swan. Like, we knew from the beginning that she was taking these great risks, and she was trying very hard to keep it. It's bold when a leader is trying to pull the wool over everyone that follows her. She kept it a secret from every single Aes Sedai except Moraine, and she had to enlist children, granted very capable children, but children to go off and pretend to be Aes Sedai to do these things because she couldn't risk having other people find out. And super, super risky, and she knew that the whole time. But she was willing to take those risks because sometimes that's what a ruler has to do. So all those implications I really enjoyed. And I just found it when she's in the prison and Min is rescuing her, I was just impressed with, I would call it her bravery to be able to continue and to fight. And, I think they have Liana there, her assistant, to kind of remind you of Liana's super depressed and crying and scared and borderline suicidal. I think RJ deliberately put her there so that we can juxtapose that against the reaction of Swan, who's we can't dwell on this stuff right now. There's too much to do. We have to go. And I just like the implications of that. It makes me very curious about the future of the White Tower. And then Logain joins the fray, which I was very interested in as well. He seems to be this wild card piece that we've been talking about over and over, but he hasn't really done anything except to get captured and shown us the consequences of being stilled and this idea of false dragons and things like that. So that whole thing it made me very curious. So that it definitely drove a lot of my curiosity about where Wheel of Time is going, was in these moments.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens with Logain. I think the first time we saw him, he just seemed so cocky and smirking at Rand when Rand was, on the wall looking at him. But yeah, Min's visions with him and the halo, I'm just what does this mean? I want to know more, because it seems like it'll be exciting when
it's very interesting.
You bring up Min there, Sandra. I know Min is a character that you really like, and Min, we've talked about this some on social media. Min is a very, from what I can tell, divisive character among and I think that I think Sarah from Fiction Fans will be okay with me saying that my sense of Sarah's opinion is that she's way deeper in the series than you and I are. Obviously Charles has read through all of it, so he's just sitting there like Moraine,
smiling at us.
But I think that Sarah's take, I think she's in book 11 now, is kind of this sense of almost disappointment and unfulfilled potential with Min, and some people feel that. But also, we did a poll of people's favorites between on Twitter between Min, Elaine, and Egwene, and I was waiting for Egwene to just sweep this thing as my first Wheel of Timer on book 3 or whatever, and then Min killed it in that poll. Elaine did the worst, by the way, for what that's worth. But yeah, so there's people who love her to the point where all those people came out and voted for her. But then there's people who feel disappointed by her. So for you, Sandra, what is the Min? Because I'm kind of I'm in this I'm early in the series. I want to see what happens with Min. She has all this potential. Where are you at with Min right now, Sandra?
I mean, I love Min as a character just because I'm intrigued by this idea of these visions that she has. But just from chapter 1, I feel like she's just kind of at the mercy of destiny and her role in the pattern that's being woven. And so, she wants to be at Rand's side, fighting beside him. But those aren't the cards that she's been dealt. So she has to be, physically distanced from him and do what she can in her way. And I don't know, that's a tough spot to be in. And then it just goes back to the whole Rand and flip-flopping with his interests with different people. And which has frustrated me, but
I'm a big Min fan as well. I like that she sticks out amongst all, she can't channel, but she does have these abilities that keeps her useful and in the action, but she stands up a lot on her own merit, which I enjoy quite a bit. I do think she's underutilized. I would like to see more of her. This book, she got very shortchanged. Robert Jordan put her in a dress and had her go around as Elmindreda. Elmindreda, to report visions to Swan and talk to Gawain. It's okay, if you have to talk to Gawain, you've dropped down into the lower sphere of the plotting of this book. So it's just a shame. But yeah, she does fall into this weird love triangle, like quadrangle, whatever you call it, with Rand at this point. I can't keep
like
track
a hexagon at this point.
Yeah, this complicated web, but she plays it well.
Yeah, she's just less of a mystery than when she was introduced as like this short-haired tomboy-ish with, you know, these cool visions. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, and I think she is. We put her in the A tier for what it's worth in that Wheel of Time character tier list, and that was, yeah. We only had like 2 people. It was like Moraine and Egwene in S tier at that time after book 3. So that's high
was
praise.
Almost
that
S tier
he
as
was
well,
close.
but
yeah. But high praise I think for what we think of Min, and I think it's because she's the kind of character along those Elaine lines where the way she interacts with the fact that she's aware of all this like Tal'Viran stuff going on and her role in it. I find that interesting, and she does stick out when she jumps off the page when she's actually getting a chance to. She's just not getting as many chances as some of these other characters. So I
really hope we get more of her in the next book.
Me as well. Well, I think this only leaves us with one like main character arc left, and that is the arc of Rand himself. Rand went through a lot in book 3. I speak for Dylan. I believe I got the sense right when I say we both appreciated how Rand was treated in The Dragon Reborn.
Yes.
We got to get like almost like a rebrand of Rand, like a reboot. He kind of like RJ kind of put him off to the side and then brought him back in strong in book 3, which I thought was a really clever way to hit the refresh on him. And now we get dropped, into book 4, and we get a lot of Rand POV. And Sandra, I just wanted to get your reaction. Like, where do we stand with Rand at the end of book 4?
Oh, can we start the start of book 4?
Sure. Okay. Let's start with the beginning. Good. That seems like a good place.
Yeah. Well, Sandra, you want to go, or you want me to rehash
start it.
My venting that I did to you when I was first starting?
Yes.
Okay.
And thank you for bearing the grunt of that, by the way, Sandra. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Charles was not having it when I was trying to. A few people have helped me through that I'd like to thank, but Sandra,
anytime. I don't have anything against Rand. It's just, there's just too many times that I'm in his head that I'm like, I really don't want to know any of this.
Yeah.
Fair.
Well, I felt like at the start of book 4, Rand like took a step back from where I felt like he had been by the end of The Dragon Reborn. And we're back to this like, oh, I'm just a shepherd from the 2 rivers, all this kind of stuff. And I felt like the arc of book 2 was Rand coming to finally accept that he was the Dragon Reborn. The arc of book 3 was like other people starting to come to accept that Rand was the Dragon Reborn. So why does book 4 start with Rand is like not accepting that he's the Dragon Reborn and he still thinks he's a shepherd from the 2 rivers again? When I thought we were well past that by the time it's like, dude, you're killing Forsaken now. Like, you're out there, you've got Kalendor, dude. Like, and so that was bothering me at the start. And the other thing was this, like, this stuff that was going on with Rand and women, especially when there's that first of the Mayen who interacts with Rand toward the beginning, and I was not, in some ways I was certainly not a fan of her character. Like, her portrayal is kind of this like she's a bad person for being straightforward about what she wants in a sexual relationship with Rand. Like, that's kind of how she's played in this book, which again, I get it. It was the 90s and it was different, but that doesn't sit well from a modern perspective. Yeah. And she, she's coming on to him, and then he's like in his quote unquote small clothes, which I guess that's underwear. But that's what I'm thinking. And Rand, it's like, Charles, you've talked about this a lot. Mm-hmm. Like, Rand, you are this like 6'8". I like to say he probably looks like Brad Pitt in Troy, but
Yes.
with red hair. And it's like he's walking around like that, and someone walks in on him in his small clothes, and he's literally like blushing and freaking out and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, it just doesn't make sense to me with Rand, given the way the world has treated him, because it's like his whole life people have still treated him this way, like he is ridiculously handsome and good looking and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, Rand, what is wrong with you that you receive all this feedback from everyone in the world and you like are still not thinking of yourself that way? That's how everyone else thinks of you. And there's literally a line from that first of the man character.
You're talking about Barrelane?
That sounds right.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So she says to him, he's like freaking out and blushing, and then like has that bubble of evil moment with the mirrors and stuff.
Yeah, it's Barrelane.
But before all that, she literally says to him, Rand, you must know that you're a handsome man, tall and strong. And I know it's like, this is not how RJ meant it, I don't think. But I was like, yeah, like you must know that. Like, how do you not know that, Rand?
Yeah, I feel like, yeah,
that way.
He should be unaffected by it. It's who's the half older brother of Elaine? Galad?
Yes,
right? Because I mean, women are always like tripping over themselves when they interact with him, and so I feel like that's what Rand grew up with in Two Rivers, so that he would be more kind of aloof about it like that. But no, he blushes. So it was almost like a relapse moment, because I feel like book 3 we didn't get a lot of Rand at all, even though it was a Dragon Reborn. And then once Shadow Rising started, it was almost like a relapse. But by the end of this 4th book, he was kind of back at it, taking ownership for things.
Yeah.
Relapse is a good word for it, because, Dylan and I talked so much when we were talking about the Dragon Reborn of like, we really appreciated RJ's restrained use of Rand and getting only this hint of him, like this ominous touching base with him. And he was like, running away, doing his own thing, like coming to terms with his powers, because we were so frustrated when throughout the Eye of the World, book 1, he's like, I'm just a shepherd from the Two Rivers. It's like, we've never seen you with a sheep ever. At least with Perrin, we got to see him do blacksmithing a ton of times. But it's like, you keep telling us you're a shepherd from the Two Rivers, but you are never that, ever. Not one time. So the fact that you keep saying that, like, is kind of frustrating. So we finally get this moment. He wields Kalendor, he fights off some Forsaken, and everyone's like paying tribute to him as a ruler. And then, like you said, like right now he's like, oh boy, like girl, oh no, I'm uncomfortable now. It's like come on, Rand, like you can at least be confident in these moments and come to this realization that you're not the same person anymore, but at least like grow into it. And I feel like you're right, Sandra. He does take on more of an authority role and does start bossing people around by the end of this book, to the point that he stands up in front of all the Aiel and basically puts the smackdown on Couladin and wins over everybody. And he like he's opening portals and like teleporting around and cutting people off from the Dark One, and he's like, this is how it's going to be now. And he's like bossing around Lanfear finally. So it's like, okay, finally, hopefully now we get no more of the shepherd talk, and we can start thinking of Rand as the Dragon Reborn. Let's hope.
I thought there were times where I thought that was going to happen before, so let's hope
that's where this should have started, if I'm being honest.
Well, everyone in the fandom loves Rand, right? So that has to happen.
So we did a poll too for Matt, Perrin, and Rand, and he came in second, I think. I think Matt won by a substantial margin, but he beat out Perrin. And honestly, like, Charles, you talk about this, like Perrin jumps off the page, especially for you. Sandra, I know that Perrin's arc in here and his kind of like reluctant hero stuff stuck out for you too, and me too. Like Perrin, it's a thing you were talking about, Charles, with like Perrin, we get these moments of like, I see a blacksmith shop. I really want to go do something there. And like, I'm clearly enjoying myself and like in a flow state doing the blacksmith stuff. And it's not like we get these moments with Rand where he's like, oh, a sheep farm. Like he's like spending time with sheep. And like, wow, like this is amazing. Like I gotta put, what kind of materials does one need for a sheep thing? Because it's like I gotta put down the sword
the
of
shears
and pick up
the shears. Yeah.
the shears. Like it's like, yeah, and the women's circle is telling Rand it's time to pick up the shears again, and he has this conflict. It's like we're not getting those moments. But yeah, sorry, you said the fandom loves Rand. A lot of them love Rand. I think it's like, look, I don't like to say that, but I did it. I personally believe that if I, let's say, I'll make it me, if I grew up reading Wheel of Time and was not in my late 20s picking this up for the first time, it would be very easy for me to self-insert Rand, and it'd feel pretty cool as a child to like feel like you're in Rand's shoes and everyone around you loves you and you're so special even though you don't feel like it on the inside, and everyone tells you how great you are and everyone loves you, right? It's like, and you don't even have to do anything. The world will just pull you toward, and he does do stuff. I don't want to crap on him too bad. I'm with you all. He comes to it at the end. But I think it's like, of course you love a character that you grew up alongside and had an easy time putting yourself in the shoes of. And if I grew up with Rand, I'm sure I would have those same kind of feelings. It's just different for someone coming back to it or not coming back to it for the first time reading a character in 2021 and as an adult, I guess.
Yeah,
that's fair. Yeah, you're right, Dylan. It's he is like the most self-insertable of all the characters, and he is the protagonist after all. And there is a lot to like about Rand, and obviously this whole idea of this reluctant hero is a interesting one, and a relatively interesting idea for fantasy at the time Robert Jordan was publishing these books. So in that perspective, it's interesting, but we just don't buy the shepherd thing, and we're ready to move past it.
Pick
Even like
shears.
I liked when Perrin already moved past it before Rand did, and he had more of a reason to be in it, because I love that moment where his old master was like, oh, like, you're gonna come and help? He's like, oh yeah, I can be in the forge later. He's like, whoa, what are you talking about? Like, you're not gonna go back in the forge. You're gonna like lead these men as a general. And he's like, oh yeah, I guess I am. Or it's like he's ready to still pick up the hammer and participate in like doing blacksmith stuff, but everyone around him's telling him like, you need to like lead people. Like, here's the like, stay in the fancy tent. Here's the fancy food. Like, go sleep. And he's like, I don't deserve these things. Like, I'm part of you guys, and I buy that, and I admire that in Perrin. And I just don't get the same vibes with Rand. However, I do buy Rand's authority now. It helps when you can channel and open portals and defeat Forsaken and all that. So I did like where we ended up with Rand at the end of this, like leading the Aiel out of the waste and causing it to rain. Like, I thought those were all like super interesting moments at the end that just solidified Rand as like, no questions about it, he is the Dragon Reborn. And yeah, I feel like that's where we ended with book 3, but we're back at book 4, and I liked it.
Yeah. I try to give Rand some grace just because he's still peeling away the layers of his own heritage and his parents, like finding out the name of his mom, Shael, and just all of the flashbacks from the Aiel being originally, like the Tuathon, the Tinkers, and I try and give Rand some, Oh yeah, that was a cool part.
The fact that these two opposites, one so pro-violence and one so anti-violence, had the same origins and then split is an interesting idea. It makes a lot of sense when it's revealed, but you never made the connection before.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And for all my Sandra, you'll notice my venting stopped like when I got about halfway through, and I was like, okay, I'm fine now. I don't need to unload all that on my friends.
It's almost like TMI, like being in his head. It's almost like TMI.
Yes,
it's like, I don't need to know.
Yes,
this,
totally.
100%. Yes.
That's why the Dragon Reborn, the way they used Rand was great, because it's like when you see, it's interesting because if you see him externally, you start to buy why other people are treating him that way. And then you're like, oh, exactly. I buy this character. This is great. Like, he's out there doing these epic things. Of course, when I'm in the shoes of, let's say, I mean, who was like like Moraine even, like watching him like wield Kalendor and take on Forsaken and stuff like that, then it's like, this guy is epic, and he's basically still like, I don't know what he is now, like a teenager or whatever, but you would think he's so amazing, of course, but when you're in his head, TMI is a great way to put it. 100%. It really is.
I need to know. Yeah.
And are we doing Avienda dirty, by the way? I kind of wanted to bring Avienda. I know it's like,
I know we've got Avienda and Matt, a few other characters, but let's do a quick Avienda reaction.
So, because Sandra, I think this is in your Instagram post that Avienda stuck out to you.
The second time, the first time I didn't really care for her all that much. I just didn't really understand where all of the animosity was coming from, but I don't know, it might be more of like a romantic tension coming through between her and Rand. And I was kind of getting like a little bit of tension between Tom and Moraine also, like the second read through. So I don't know.
Ooh,
it's interesting to see.
That is interesting, Charles, and his the
I can't say.
You know I don't, so
all I have to say is interesting.
It's like we never we never got any of that, you know, background on Moraine at all. She's just been this huge mystery, and it was kind of refreshing to see her open up to the other women a little bit about that.
For sure. She dropped that line, and it was classic Aes Sedai language. It was something like, she said to Elaine and Egwene, like, I guarantee I know the face of my future husband more than you know the face of who you're going to marry. Right. And it was one of those, like, I stopped and I was like, wait, what does that mean? And I was kind of like, because it has to be the truth, as far, like, at least I take that at face value, that Moraine is held to this, like, it has to be the truth thing. And that's where RJ shines a lot, is when he drops things like that and gets you asking these questions. The Tom thing makes a lot of sense. I never thought about that before, but I'll be watching out for that. And the Avienda thing, I feel the same way as you, Sandra, with, like, I think she is like every other character around Rand's age who's a girl or woman, they are like, they start getting feelings for Rand, and Rand, I think Avienda's wrapped up in all this Tavir and stuff, but I think she wants to be Elaine's friend super badly, and she starts kind of projecting this, like, she has these strong emotions happening, and she, like, it's kind of a nice friend thing that she's trying really hard to project, like, her anger as, like, you should be with Elaine, like, you should be not, like, looking at these other women, all this kind of stuff.
Sandra.
So good for Avienda for trying to be a good friend. I love these moments when the like Egwene and Elaine and Avienda and Min, when she gets a chance, get to, like, actually relate to each other as friends. And I don't know, I think Avienda is trying to do that, and that sticks out for me.
Yeah, I also wonder, because it is culturally, like, acceptable for the Aiel to, the sister wives concept. So I wonder, like, how much of Avienda's apprehension about how she's feeling toward him is, like, mixed up in all of that.
Yeah,
I
didn't think of that. No, that makes total sense, because it's like Avienda, assuming that we're on the right track here, Avienda is basically thinking, like, she watched Elaine want to fight the first of the Mayan, or Charles, you had the name earlier.
Barrelane?
Barrelane, thank you. Like, she watched, and she was like, seeing that Elaine was super jealous of Barrelane, and then she was almost like, why don't you fight her with swords? And Elaine was like, I don't know if that's the way I'm gonna personally handle this. Elaine's a little more tactful than that, but I think Avienda probably is coming from this, like, cultural perspective of, like, this would be so much easier if people were just like they are where I'm from, and like me and Elaine could be best buds while both being with Rand.
Yeah.
So it's probably there's probably a lot going on for her internally, and I think she might be one of those characters that I assume we'll get her point of view some point in this 14 book series.
That would be really cool.
And I'm excited for that. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, Abby, you start to learn more about the Aiel, and there's a lot of interesting perspectives there about this idea of honor and violence versus nonviolence, and how that is pulling at her between her duty to her people and her friendship with Elaine, and like, yeah, that's all very interesting. And yeah, it stands out, especially like when you compare it to these moments. Like you touched, Dylan, on that Barrelane and Elaine when they came at each other.
Yeah.
I was not a fan of that scene at all, where they were.
I think that was Fael. Did they have a moment, Elaine and
yeah? Because then that general came out and like disciplined them both and like sent Barrelane off. Was that Barrelane and Elaine?
I think it was Fael, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
I just remember this random general coming up and being like disciplining them all. I'm like, who is this guy? And how come he gets to like he like embarrasses them both and like sends them off to their rooms was the vibe. I was like, this is a weird scene. Not a fan. And that I feel like that's kind of why I don't almost forgot to talk about Fael, because she so falls into this thing we got so many times in this book of just like, I hate to say this, like the catty female trope of like, oh, now she's bothering Rand.
Oh, yeah.
Like everyone's, and then like Fael's bothering Perrin, and like Fael's bothering Rand,
and she was manipulating Loyal, but there was like one scene, I guess I didn't really like get it the first time I read it, but when she like hit Perrin across the face, like full arm. Like into it, and I was just like, why?
She does that multiple times, and Perrin's like, don't do that again, and it's like,
so I feel like this is going to be their relationship dynamic, though.
I think they're kind of into it.
I think,
maybe.
I think RJ's into it. I think it's just gonna. I think RJ wanted, with all these characters that are like young and teenagers and working out these like love triangle or hexagon situations, I think that RJ, I bet where he's going is he's I think at the time too was married when he was writing this, and he was kind of like, I want to explore what relationship dynamics are like when you're actually married already, because that's its own thing. And I have a feeling that it'll be a lot like whatever his marriage happened to be like. So we'll see where that ends up going, because I have no idea as a first Wheel of Timer. And I don't know anything about RJ's marriage besides that I think his wife was his editor and he based characters on her. I think that is what I've heard. I could be wrong.
Well, I know that we are coming close to time. There's just so many things that happen in this book. The book is super long.
Yeah.
I just wanted to turn it back to you guys. Make sure, is there anyone that we definitely want to make sure we talk about before we wrap it up here?
I mean, I have to ask Dylan. So, Loyal.
Oh, boy.
Nay?
So here's the thing about Loyal is like, if you listen to the first, and I know you have, so I know you have.
You did it, Sedge.
Is like the first Eye of the World recording and things like that is like, the Loyal thing has always been a meme. And I say that in the Eye of the World episode for everyone listening now who thinks I'm like this. And it sucks because people think I'm like mean to this like poor unproblematic character, and I leaned into it for longer than was probably good for anyone, including myself. So I'm kind of, and especially he did bother me because he felt like he slowed the story down and then told everyone not to be hasty over and over again, and I kind of exaggerate it for memeing purposes. And I think this book, and just the amount of Loyal talk that goes on social media now, has me like reflecting a little bit more on Loyal and at my position on Loyal. And I've reached a point, especially because he did a lot of stuff in this book. He was
did.
out there
At the end, he had
fighting.
yeah.
He
And the
closed the
beginning.
way gate. He saved that guy by running the whole time,
yeah.
carrying him.
Like,
yeah.
With 50 Trollocs chasing them
He was out there. And I think my issue with Loyal, though it was exaggerated, it existed. And it was this like, you don't do anything. And this book, you don't do anything and you yell at other people for doing things and call them hasty. So that was my issue. And this book, he's out there doing things and being a hero, actually. Like he and Fail, not our favorite character, but says like, hey, Loyal saved someone in that giant Trolloc fight at the way beginning of the book. And he's a hero. Like, let's start treating this guy like a hero. And he's super humble about the great deeds he actually accomplished in this book. So I actually think Loyal is coming into his own. And I think I'm kind of, publicly going to like shift gears on my Loyal narrative. And it starts right now, which is Loyal has grown as a character, and I actually enjoyed him in this book. So that's where I'm at. And thank you for asking, Sandra. I appreciate it.
Had to know. Yeah.
I think one other character we need to quickly bring up, because like you said, Dylan, he's dominated our Twitter poll for best character between the three of them, and that's Matt. And Matt does go through some interesting development here. Sandra, I was wondering what you thought of Matt's like plot points in this story and like how Matt ranks for you against all these other Taviran characters.
I mean, he's up there for me. He's a wild card. I'm always looking forward to what he does. I think previously, I've likened him to being the quote, dumb guy in horror movies. He does like the exact opposite thing that he should, but it always leads to something interesting. So when he goes through the doorway and asks the questions from the snake people, like that was an interesting scene to me. But then later in the book, when he goes through the doorway again in Ruadan, I mean, he just approaches everything without thinking it through. He just jumps.
And I think that in another book, and that horror movie thing, when I first heard you say that in one of the videos, I was like, that I would not have thought of that, but that's it with Matt. And I think in the horror movie, you're kind of like screaming because you know what's happening and you're like, you're going to die for this. But I think in Wheel of Time, why he appeals so much, and he appeals to me too, is this like, no one else is doing that. And they're not taking risks and they're being reluctant when honestly, we would have a lot more cool things happening if you just take the risk, just go for it, blow the horn. And I think it's like Matt, he's basically like told, don't go into that twisted redstone door frame. He's like, I would never do that unless my life depended on it. And then he finds it and he's like, nice, doing it. And I really appreciate that. And you get these are, I think, some shining moments for RJ is when he goes kind of surreal and dreamscapey and all that kind of stuff. And we get these really interesting moments of Matt interacting with those like creatures in this totally different dimension. I'm like, that had me like tuned in. And I'll say, Sandra, that one of the things I thought you might appreciate those moments too, because, one of the times when I was like, she gets it when I was watching your Wheel of Time stuff was when you brought up Mr. Nobody in The Great Hunt, which is something that
major vibes.
Yeah. And I was like, so I figure you might appreciate the, like, at least the way Matt takes the risks that put him into these like surreal, interesting places that other people would be like, I'm not going to go through that doorway. I'm a shepherd.
Yeah. No, I'm all for that. And anything more with the portal stones or, even the way gates, just all how sinister and creepy that is. Like all of those scenes, love them. Eat them up.
Yeah. Totally I for me, Matt is one of my favorite characters to read because out of all the characters, I think Matt is the one that validates my reading experience the most. Like, he's the first one to be like, well, let's just do this. Let's just go. Or he's the first one to be like, forget you guys. Like, this is insane. I'm out of here. Or like, isn't it just more fun to like gamble and take the Lord's money and hang out for a while? And like, I was like, I don't want to go back to Two Rivers. That place sucked. Like, there was nothing great about herding sheep. Like, what am I going to do? Go farm farming her sheep my whole life. The city's awesome. And it's like, what, more rain? Who cares that she could throw fireballs? I want nothing to do with her. So all those opinions, like he's the only character having those opinions and doing anything about it and like living his own life in this world where no one is doing that. And I'm like, thank you so much, Matt, for living your life and doing what you want to do. I appreciate that so much. And yeah, he just handles it. You know, he's funny too. He seems to be a lot of the comic relief. I love, like, even at the end where Rand is giving his speech and he's like patting the saddle, like, we can still get away. We can still, like, it's like, we should get out of here. Like, this could turn on us. Like, the idea of him willing to just escape with Rand from this whole thing. Like, he's still willing to do that after all of this. Like, Rand is committed and isn't even tempted by it, but Matt is still like, hey, we could like slum it in the city and I can gamble and make us some money. We don't have to like try and convince all of the Aiel to follow you in this moment. So I always appreciated that about Matt. And that's why I think he sticks out as a fan favorite. All those risks, like you guys were saying, and just the ability to have his own thoughts and opinions. And even if they're unpopular, he's willing to do his own thing. Well, guys, we covered a lot of it. Is there anything else we should address before we call it a day?
I mean,
probably, but I don't know.
Right.
Like,
I feel like we at least...
you didn't want Elaine to be MVP. Charles, I could see it on your face when I brought it up. Who were you thinking?
Most improved, fine. MVP, it might be controversial to give it to Nynaeve because she was barely in it, but I was very, like, she did the most impressive thing to me.
I mean,
Swan
too. That was big. Yeah.
Swan did a really good job.
MVP for Swan?
No. I'm thinking either Nynaeve or Perrin. I gotta give it to Perrin. He had most of the story. It's just such a Perrin book, and he owned it, and he filled the shoes big time. So I think Perrin MVP.
Yeah, I'll still go Elaine for my person. I think Perrin's a fair take. Yeah. Sandra, who's your favorite?
Fine. I'll take Nynaeve because the concept of being able to control, men who can channel the power. I think the fact that she was able to get the collar and bracelets and stuff, I'm really interested to see where that goes. So
I've always loved
probably best moment too.
Oh, best moment probably. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I just appreciate when she's proactive. She's like one of the most proactive characters, and she can. I just appreciate that from Nynaeve. It's true. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Sandra, thank you so much for being on and for taking time out of your day to reread this massive tome of a book and for coming on and putting up with all our shenanigans. Thank you so much. And we really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Always down to dork out about fantasy. So thank you guys so much for inviting me.
Our pleasure. And guys, be sure to follow Sandra Gibbons over on Twitter at Sandra Gibbons and follow her on YouTube as well. She's going through all of the Wheel of Time and subscribe. Yes, subscribe on YouTube. You're right. We're not big. We are not active on YouTube.
We watch.
So,
we pay attention to the booktubers, but we have not booktubed ourselves very much at all, actually.
But definitely go check Sandra out. She's already talked about a lot of the early Wheel of Time books, so you definitely go listen to those. And if you like fantasy, there's a lot to take in over there. So again, Sandra, thank you for being here.
Thank you, guys.
All right, bye, everybody.
So much fun, Sandra. Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and goodbye,
Take
everybody.
care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. Thank you so much to Sandra Gibbons for her time today, for talking Wheel of Time with us. We appreciated it so much. We hope to work with her again in the very near future. So go to YouTube, follow, subscribe on YouTube. I'm not used to that. To Sandra Gibbons. So do that, and then after you've done that, go on to Twitter, and then you can also follow Sandra Gibbons at Sandra Gibbons, and then after that, follow Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end, and then on Instagram and Facebook at the FTF Podcast. And you can always send us an email at the FTF Podcast at gmail.com. Now, Dylan, if they've listened to the show, they've subscribed and followed to Sandra, and now they want to do something else to support Friends Talking Fantasy, and they just so happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast. Just find that Friends Talking Fantasy page on the Apple Podcast app. Roll down past all those episodes until you start seeing stars. Once you're seeing stars, the optimal number of those stars to click to support the show would be 5 of them. If you have some extra time and you really, number 1 is go follow Sandra on Twitter. Of course. Subscribe to her on YouTube because we're so grateful she came on and had a ton of fun. But if you have even more time, then you can write us a review. That does help our show, help people find it and all that kind of stuff. So that's really appreciated when folks do that. But just listening is more than enough. Thank you.
Just listening, guys. We really appreciate your time today. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.